Sitemaps, a UX designer's silver bullet when it comes to structuring a website. Websites don't just fall out of the sky. It takes a designer, like you, to think about how all the different pieces of information and all the different pages should fit together to form a smooth experience. How do they do that? By creating great sitemaps. So what exactly are sitemaps? Well, it's in the name. They're maps for a website, visual representations of all of that website's content. Building a website without a sitemap is kind of like building an airplane without schematics. It's probably going to fall apart, and we want our websites to fly, or you know what I mean. Websites also aren't just built by one person. It takes a team of people, and sitemaps form a great reference point and a single source of truth for that entire team to reference when they need to understand how the website should be designed and structured. Speaking of sitemap structure, there are a couple of different ways that they actually can be structured. So let's look at the different types of sitemaps there are. The first and probably most common type of sitemap is hierarchical. This organizes content in a tree-like structure, where you have your main pages at the top, followed by the sub-pages branching out at the bottom, and all the other content as well. This structure is best for large, really complicated websites with a lot of information. Think a site like Amazon. Another sitemap structure is flat, and this organizes the content in a flat structure, where any page can be accessed by the user in 1 or 2 clicks. You might have guessed, but this kind of structure is better for small websites. Think the website for your local coffee shop. You may also run into sequential sitemaps, where the content is structured in a linear flow that follows a specific sequence. This kind of structure is best used when users need to follow some kind of step-by-step process. Think registration form or some kind of tutorial. Now that we've covered that, how do we actually create sitemaps? Well, I'm going to show you. And for this tutorial, I'm going to create a sitemap for an e-commerce website. And like we talked about before, since e-commerce websites typically have a ton of pages and a lot of information, we're going to use a hierarchical structure. The first step is you're going to pick a tool to build your sitemap in. I personally really like using FigJam. You can also use a tool like Miro. It just comes down to personal preference. Once we're in FigJam, the first step is to actually list out all of the content that our website is going to need. So let's say we're building an e-commerce site for a fashion brand. I think I'll probably want a homepage, women's wear, menswear, kids section, maybe a blog, and maybe a page for stores and their locations. At this point, it's really important to think about the needs of the business, so the website that I'm actually creating, and also the needs of our users. That's really going to help us determine all of the different information that's going to have to go underneath within these pages. It's also going to help us prioritize which pages need to be closer to the top, or which ones need to be more accessible for users, which ones will be within fewer clicks. For example, underneath women's wear, a subpage could be clothing. Another one could be shoes, and another one could be accessories. And then underneath the clothing page, there could be a ton of other subpages like outerwear, jeans, swimwear, right? The list goes on and on. If we're thinking about our users' needs here, it might make a lot of sense to give our users easy access to some bestsellers. So putting a bestsellers page that's easily accessible from the women's page itself might make a lot of sense. Sitemaps can get pretty dense, so just be prepared for that. In fact, why don't we take a look at an example of a really good sitemap, and then I'll also show you an example of a website that clearly hasn't thought about its sitemap very much. So an example of a fashion sitemap that is structured very well is Reese.com. This is a UK-based clothing brand, and a lot of sites that have sitemaps will actually let you view their sitemap. So we can click right here to see all of the primary categories, subcategories, sub-subcategories, right? This informational structure just makes a ton of sense. Everything is very neat, everything is very organized, and as we can see, there is a ton of information here. So you can imagine what a poorly structured sitemap or even a lack of a sitemap would lead to. But if we scroll through Reese's website, right, everything is very easy to find. Whether I'm a man looking for clothes, a woman looking for clothes, if I'm looking for clothes for my children, right, all of this stuff is extremely accessible. That's because a designer or a team of designers spent a long time thinking about how to categorize all this information and creating a sitemap that is functional. Let's now look on the other side of the coin at a website that probably just doesn't have a sitemap, or if they do, it wasn't very well thought out. So if we go to united.com, there's a ton of conflicting information here, and the navigation generally is pretty confusing. Let's just look under the first category, right, which is book. So I can book a flight, and then under book a flight, I can check flights, I can look at award travel, there's a map search, I can personalize my trip, not really sure what that means, but I'm assuming that all these categories correlate to booking a flight. But then there are other travel options too, like booking cars and booking hotels. But then how, for example, do I get to awards for hotel bookings? It's really not clear here from this navigation. Another example of confusing navigation here, under travel info, there's a planning travel column and then a day of travel column. There's a lot of different information here, right? And it's not structured into any categories. Under day of travel, there's baggage info, flight stats, airport info, onboard services, prepaid Wi-Fi, United Club, traveling with special needs, traveling for seniors. I don't understand why any of that is under day of travel. It's a really broad category. Maybe I want to find out my aircraft info for the day of travel, but aircraft info is actually under planning travels. It doesn't make any sense to me why they chose to structure the information in this way. And something that's quite telling, you might remember that on Reese's website, we were able to find the sitemap really easily. I actually can't find it on United's website, and maybe that's just because they didn't bother to make one. In any case, it becomes pretty clear that not having a well-structured sitemap can lead to a website's information and pages becoming pretty overwhelming pretty fast. So the next time you're tasked with organizing a website or designing a website, make sure that you construct a sitemap that includes all of the information that the website needs to contain in order for users to accomplish their goals, and structure that information in a way that is logical and makes sense. Also, you don't have to do this in a silo. Once you've got a first draft of a sitemap, make sure you share it with your engineers and the rest of your team. Get some feedback on it. There's a lot of information that has to go into these things, and just relying on your own brain to make sure all the information is in there and that it's logical is probably not the best approach. Get a third-party perspective to make sure that the information is structured logically and that you've organized it well. Good luck with your sitemaps, and if you have any questions about anything related to sitemaps or other UX topics, post them in the comments below. And if you want more UX tips and tricks, make sure you subscribe to Logline.